Hi, I'm Fraser Gibb from the Edinburgh Centre for Endocrinology and Diabetes, and I'm going to be talking today about reviewing my data with the Freestyle Libre. These are my disclosures. So the key thing with the Freestyle Libre is that regular data review is really essential to get the most out of the system, and the best way to do that is with a system called LibreView, which is available at libreview.com. When you start using a Freestyle Libre, you initially will have at least 10 times more data to review than you would have done with finger prick testing, and using this system really does help get to grips with that additional information. When you go onto the LibreView website, you're faced with a few click boxes to advance through initially, and then once you've done that, it gives you the opportunity to upload your glucose meter and look at your data. And the red circle at the top there shows you how you can do that. We have provided an information sheet which helps you get to grips with uploading your data and setting up the system, and you'll be able to access this on our website. And there are two different processes. If you use a mobile phone to scan your Libre, then all you need to do is set up your Libre Link account and you'll already be able to log in automatically to LibreView. If you use the Libre Reader, then you will have to take a few additional steps, and the guide will show you how to do that. So once you've set up a LibreView account, then one key thing to do is to set up a link to your own hospital clinic, and that information is available by clicking on the box which is indicated on the screen with the red circle. And once you have done that, you'll see a range of options there, and we'd ask that you click Account Settings. And once you get beyond that, you've got the opportunity to input your practice code. Now, your own clinic team should be able to tell you what that is, and once you've added your clinic, it means they're able to access your Libre data, and should you ask them to review that, then they'll be able to do that automatically without you actually needing to physically attend a clinic. So once you've set up LibreView initially, then you'll want to look at your own glucose reports, and the thing to do first of all is to click the glucose tab at the top of the screen indicated by the little drop of blood, and then to click on View Full Reports, and that will give you a screen that looks like this. Shows a range of different options for report types that are available, and you'll also see underneath that there's information on what your target glucose range is, and we'd suggest typically you leave that at 3.9 to 10 millimoles per litre. Once you've clicked through to that, you will get a range of options to review your data, and probably the first port of call here is the snapshot view, which you can access by clicking up at the top corner of the screen where there are various options for different screens to view. The snapshot has a number of different features. The first thing perhaps to look at is the information on your average glucose over the last 2 weeks, and it also provides information on your time in range, your time above the target range, and your time below the target range. Typically, as a goal, we'd be looking at achieving over 70% time in range, but that for most people will be an ambitious target initially, and the whole point of reviewing this data is to be able to work towards achieving that over time. When it comes to percentage time below target, then we'd be looking at ideally that being less than 5% of time. At the top right-hand side of the screen, you will see your estimated HbA1c, and that's provided both in the old percentage units and the new millimoles per mole units as well. And an incredibly useful screen for reviewing low glucose events is this highlighted feature here. And that graph shows you not only when you've had a low glucose event, but what time of day, how long it's lasted, and quite how deep the hypoglycemia has been. So one of the features of the LibreView report is a way of integrating all of that information together to make it easier to understand. And what you're presented with here is the old reality of continuous glucose monitoring data, which was this spaghetti type graph with lots of different lines, very difficult to understand. And even the summary line, which is bolder and in the middle here, is quite difficult to interpret. What the ambulatory glucose profile, or AGP, does is try and condense that all into something that's a little easier to understand. The top graph here just shows every single individual data point for someone who's using a Libre over a 2-week period, and that's still quite tricky to interpret. The ambulatory glucose profile shrinks that all down and summarises it, so what you see is more like the graph on the bottom there. So this is an example here of an ambulatory glucose profile, and what you see is the dark blue line which goes across the screen is the median or average glucose. The dark blue bar across that is the range, the 25th to 75th percentile, which essentially means where 50% of your glucose values fall at any time. And then the lighter bar is the 10th to 90th percentile, so that's where 80% of your glucose values will fall. There's a traffic light system provided on the AGP report which shows you whether you've got a green or low risk up to a red or high risk of either hypo or hyperglycemia, depending on the part of the report. So I'm going to move on now to 3 examples of the ambulatory glucose profile, and it's important for each of these to look at the variability, which you can tell by how wide the bars are surrounding the average line. If you see very narrow variability, very narrow blue bars between the median line, that essentially means that this is low variability. It's likely to be quite representative of the overall pattern day to day. Whereas if you see very wide bars, like in example B here, that suggests that this is not likely to be a pattern that replicates itself day after day, and probably you have to look into a lot more detail on the day-to-day traces to get an idea of what's going on. So we'll start with example A. You can see here that this is somebody who has a good estimated HbA1c of 44 millimoles per mole, so on target, but that does appear to be at the expense of a very high risk of hypoglycemia, and that's indicated by the red traffic lights across this graph, and also the fact that you can see the centile lines cross quite comfortably down to the low glucose threshold. So the question this generates is this person having lots of overnight hypoglycemia? And looking at the daily log, which is the other part of the report that you can access, you begin to see the individual glucose traces for each day, that there is indeed a trend towards glucose dropping overnight and quite often dropping into the hypoglycemic range, which is clearly the issue that needs to be addressed in this situation. The information in the daily log can be quite plentiful depending on how much information you input on your Libre system. So whether you use your phone or whether you use the Libre reader, you have the opportunity to record your meal carbohydrate counts, the insulin dose you took at any given time, and also notes like hypoglycemia treatments or when you've exercised, and indeed the type of food you've had, so that if you're wanting, even for a short spell of time, to record very detailed information about your diabetes, you can then reflect on that after a week or two to get a very clear indication of what seems to be working well and where there are potentially problems. And you can see in this individual, there seems to be proportionally a very high basal insulin dose compared to their bolus insulin dose, which may explain some of that overnight hypoglycemia and suggest a solution here. The next example is the one with a good deal more variability, much wider bands across the average line. And this would begin to raise questions, given the high estimated A1C, of whether there has been concordance with the suggested insulin therapy and whether there's a chaotic element to this person's diabetes management at the moment. And indeed, when you look at the day-to-day traces, you can see a lot of the time this person is running with very high glucose levels, not many scans done each day, and it doesn't appear that there have been corrective actions taken, or certainly effectively taken, to bring the glucose back down to target when it has been high. So you can see for any given time of the day here, there isn't really a clear pattern to suggest a single change or a simple solution to this particular problem. Another view that you're able to access on LibreView is the monthly summary, and whilst this is probably not as useful as the ambulatory glucose profile and the daily traces, it's something that means you can look down a day of the week or weekends particularly to see whether that's a time where more low glucose events, which are represented by the little red symbol here, are occurring. You can have a look at the average number of scans you're doing per day, and it gives you an idea of your average glucose for each day of the week, so that you can see if there is indeed a pattern related to your weekly routine. This Mealtime patterns page is really only useful in people who are still doing finger prick testing, because unfortunately it doesn't actually utilise Libre data, but only finger prick glucose testing data. But if that's something you are doing, then it gives it a nice indication of whether there's a rise after meals and whether anything needs to be addressed in terms of carbohydrate counting and meal dose adjustment. And then finally, the weekly summary is very similar to the daily log, although in this situation you have a summary on the side which shows the average glucose value each day, daily carbohydrate intake, and space for you to input your insulin doses for the day to review what impact that may be having on the daily glucose profile. So to conclude, we would recommend people using the Libre review their data on the Libre View system at least every couple of weeks. It's much more effective than looking at the very small screen either on your mobile phone or on the reader itself, which can be quite difficult to interpret. We'd strongly encourage people to use Libre View and link up to the clinic that you attend, as it then gives you the opportunity to correspond with your clinic by email or telephone and have your healthcare provider look at your data without necessarily having to attend the clinic yourself. I would suggest that regular data review is really a key component of getting the most out of using the Freestyle Libre, and I thank you for your attention.